Thank you very much for joining us today for this ELSI seminar organized within the PROTECT-CHILD project. My name is Nerea Molina and I'm part of the team leading Work Package 11 on ethical, legal and social issues assessment. It's a pleasure to have here Dr. Francesca Gennari as our speaker. And she is affiliated with the Scuola Superiore Sant'Anna in Pisa, where she works at the intersection of law, science, and technology, if it's okay. So in today's seminar, she will guide us through an important topic, which is European Clinical Trials Regulation, its framework, and practical challenges after the transition period. Francesca has kindly designed this session to be interactive, so during, for sure, after the presentation, we will have time for questions and discussions. So Francesca, thank you very much for accepting, for being with us today. And the floor is yours.
Thank you, Nerea, and thanks everyone. I'm really happy to be here, even though online, but I hope to see you in person at some point. I also want to thank the connection actually to your project and me, who is Guillermo, and I've seen he's joined the chat, so thanks to him as well. So today, when Nerea asked me, I wanted to talk about the clinical trials regulation, but I must say that when Nerea told me that I had 40 minutes, it seemed a daunting task because, as you might already know also better than me, it is an extremely complex and extremely technical regulation, which has taken more than 10 years to be finally implemented. Without further ado, I think that I will just tell you a bit about myself and about my background. Then I wanted also to thank you again for participating in the anonymous survey that was circulated by Nerea some weeks ago, because it helped me a lot to select the topics and how to convey them to you. And then we will go into the, let's say, gist of this presentation, which is basically the rationales of the CTR. Why did we need this change from the previous directive? Then I will focus mostly on how the clinical trials should be done according to the clinical trials regulation. So I focus mainly on the authorization procedure, then the life cycle of the clinical trial, and how practically a clinical trial is carried out. If we have some time, I will also speak about what is more of my, let's say in Italian, pane quotidiano, like what I usually deal with, which is vigilance and liability. And then, of course, I also provided you with some resources that I found on the EMA's website, which are really detailed, especially as far as the XIII portal is concerned. So as Nerea already told you, I'm a bit of a strange animal in the sense that I studied law. That was my main field of study, and I studied it through Italy and France, where I also started my professional career at the European Ombudsman, which is the institution tasked with checking that the principle of good administration is implemented at the institution of the EU. And then I did my PhD because in law, science and technology, because while I was working at the Ombudsman, I started seeing that technology was impacting a lot the life of citizens through privacy mainly. So yeah, and after my PhD between Vilnius, Bologna and Turin, I started working in Pisa as a technologa or research associate, and I shifted a bit my interest from, let's say, the legal liability of mainly the Internet of Things in the house to medical devices and in general new technologies such as AI and also robotics. Again, thank you for the people who took the time of completing the survey. I think I wanted to show you some of the results that I got, which I found interesting. When I asked you what the main struggle was with the clinical trials regulation, you were saying to understand how to coordinate with other legal acts and also how it impacts your daily life. In order to do that, actually, I needed to combine it with the results of this other question, which is what did you expect from this seminar? So as you could see, to have a clear idea about how the CTR worked was the main let's say result. So basically I will concentrate also into conveying the rules of the CTR on how to especially how it will impact your work, and then if there is time during the question time, I can give you maybe some more hints about how to coordinate with other legal acts such as the GDPR. It was very funny this graph because I've already used the XIII system and it was a perfect no. But I have a good news for you. If you are not the sponsor, you don't have to use it. So maybe I give you a nice news today. So to start with, the rationale of the clinical trials regulation, I think this you have always to keep in mind when you are reading the rules, because the general principle states that the clinical trial may be conducted only if the rights, safety, dignity, and especially well-being of subjects are protected and must prevail over all other interests, economics and academics as well, and it is designed to generate reliable and robust data. So whenever you are in a doubtful situation, you have to refer to this principle, and especially to letter A. Always think about what is the best for the subjects, about its safety and dignity. Unfortunately, the clinical trials regulation, despite it's so long and also very technical, tells very little about minors, but it gives us some criteria in order through which we can interpret the different norms. Maybe you are already acquainted with the structure of legal acts in the EU, and you know that before the article there is sometimes a very long list of what we call recitals, meaning let's say sentences that serve as an interpretation of the articles, which are actually the enforceable part, for instance, of the EU regulation. And here I did a bit of research and I found only 2 recitals which are specifically focusing on minors. The first is recital 9, which states that whenever minors are involved, expertise is requested both by people carrying out the clinical trials, but also we will see from the reporting member state, which is tasked to evaluate whether a clinical trial can actually start or not. And also, as a further parameter, in order to evaluate whether the well-being, safety and dignity of the minor is involved, we have also the Charter of Fundamental Rights and Freedom of the EU. Of course, this is an ethical parameter also to follow, which will be applied through. We know that there will be a legal representative of the minor, but we have always to think about what the minor interest will be. Just see if I can go forward here. So now the maybe unpleasant question. Why did we have to have a regulation instead of the directive that we had before? So here I will have to speak a bit of legalese, but I will reduce it to a minimum. So under the first, let's say, legal act which dealt with clinical trials in the EU, it was a directive, and it was showing some shortcomings because it was very difficult to have a European dimension to clinical trials, meaning that I could start, for instance, a clinical trial on minors in Italy, and there was not let's say, fast and easy way to understand whether in Spain or in France or in Germany there were other clinical trials very similar to mine. And why would I ask that? Because, of course, data is essential, representativeness as well, and it might have been important to unite forces. So that is why also the XIII portal was implemented for researchers to understand what's going on at the EU level, whether there are also other academic institutions that have had a similar research idea, and if they're carrying out effectively their trial. I already a bit implied the fact that the the Clinical Trial Directive wanted to give a European dimension to foster research, but in reality, the clinical trials stayed at a national level mainly, whereas with the implementation of the TIS, it will be hopefully easier to conduct a transnational research, because it is a single entry point for a whole, even multinational procedure. Then here it's a bit of the legal part. Probably you already know this, but I always repeat it, that the directive and the regulations are different legal acts according to EU law. If I have a directive as a member state, I'm obliged to meet the result that this directive wants to achieve, but I am allowed a certain margin of discretion as far as the implementation of it is concerned. Instead, if I have a regulation, as a member state, I am obliged not only to follow and to reach the objective that is established by the directive, but by the regulation, but also through the means that is described in the regulation. So there is not a lot of margin of discretion for me, unless it is provided otherwise. And in a way, the directive let different approaches reach the same result. And in this way, but you can see that there might be a fragmentation, especially in a field such as the one of scientific and biomedical research, where also academics around Europe want to have more predictable rules and application of them to have a more representative research. So it's important to have in mind some definitions when we approach the clinical trial regulation. This has not changed from the previous let's say, directive, but you have to understand that clinical trial, the definition, which already I think you know maybe better than me, is to discover or verify clinical, pharmacological, or other pharmacodynamic effects, to identify new adverse reaction, or also to study the absorption of some medicinal. And the clinical trial is actually a subset of a clinical study, and in particular, it is a clinical trial, any clinical study that has either or all of the three of the options that are listed in this list of three letters. Basically, you want to implement something that is outside the normal clinical practice of the member state, or you decide, for instance, to include with a person within a clinical study, or also you can use diagnostics or monitoring procedures to get new results from research. Then here you have to understand which are the different stakeholders that are really important for the clinical trial regulation. The sponsor is an individual, a company, an institution, an organization, which basically takes the responsibility for the initiation of the trial. Most of the time, it can be a pharmaceutical company. Okay, but not always. In fact, the sponsor can sometimes coincide with the investigator. Investigator is the person, the individual responsible that conducts a clinical trial at a clinical trial site, and must be a doctor or a dentist. Then I also joined you the notion of principal investigator, because basically it's, if especially we have a multinational clinical trial, there might be more investigators, maybe one responsible for a clinical trials, each clinical trial site, and there must be one that directs them and that allocates responsibilities for the clinical trial as a whole. And then we have the definition of minor, which is relying on national member state law. For instance, but I also think it's the case in Spain, in Italy, the age in which a person is considered legally capable is 18. Okay, then we can have some differences in, let's say, the minor age spectrum between people who are still children, some who are adolescents around the age of 14, and then, let's say, we call them grandi minori, big minors, like translated literally, so people from 14 to the 17th years of age. And of course, they cannot represent themselves directly, but through a legally designated representative. Even here, it's really the CTR relying on the member state definition of what is a legally designated representative. Generally, it is a parent, one of the two, or maybe a tutor if the child has no parents. Then, when we are defining important things in the CTR, we have to remember the protocol. You know that it's the document that describes the objective, the design, the methodology, the statistical consideration and organization of the clinical trial, and also the investigator's brochure, and it's a compilation of clinical and non-clinical data for the medicinal products, and that must be updated at some, let's say, regularly, I think once per year by the investigator, if nothing like really big happens to have a substantial modification of the CTR, but maybe we will talk about it later. So here I decided, given the fact that I understand that many of you do not have a legal background, to have a kind of, let's say, flow of the CTR and to divide it in functions and, let's say, parts that you can find whenever you want to achieve something. So the first part is the authorization. It's the part on which we will insist mostly. Then we have some points of the life cycle of a clinical trial, such as the start, the end, but also other events that can happen, such as a temporary halt and early termination of the clinical trial. Then perhaps I think that you are much more expert than me because you conducted clinical trial for many years, as far as I understood. But yeah, there are some rules concerning the conduction of the clinical trial, the supervision of the sponsor, and the training and experience. And finally, the vigilance and the liability chapters. So, so far as now, everything is more or less clear. Shall I go further, or are there any questions already? No? Okay. So basically, now there is the authorization procedure, which is a bit of a maybe something difficult to first to understand, to explain, and to put into practice. But I'll try to do it in the simplest term. If anything is not clear, please interrupt me and I will tell you again and try to make examples. So basically, let's suppose that I'm in Italy and I want to start a clinical trial involving pediatric patients. Okay, what shall I do? So first of all, I need to seek an ethical review. And the Article 4 of the CTR tells me that I have to rely on the rules of the member states that I want to use as the main site maybe of the clinical trial to understand to which ethical committee I have to ask whether my clinical trial is fit for purpose and is safe for patients. So in Italy, we have a distinction between territorial and national ethical committees. And for pediatric patients, I'm very lucky because there is a national ethical committee. So I don't have to ask to all the territorial committees to approve my, my clinical trial. At the same time, I have the sponsor, not me, because perhaps I'm the investigator, the sponsor has to start through this, the submission procedure. let me just go back again to the, let's say, ethical review. Of course, here it relies mainly on national rules that must take these references in order to be compliant with the CTR. In fact, my National Ethical Committee will have to look also at aspects that are addressed in the part one of the assessment, which is the procedure that we're seeing later, but they might be, for instance, they have to evaluate the risk for the patient, the benefit that this clinical trial might impose, or and then also the clinical, the ethical committee will have to look at the aspects of the second part of the assessment. I just say them here like to be clearer, but then I will repeat them. The second part of the assessment, which is done in reality by the member states at the same time that we're having the ethical review, it's for instance to check whether the informed consent is planned to be given in a certain way that is fit for the patients, or that the GDPR rules are respected. The member states must give to the ethical committees a timeline so that it is not delayed the result of the evaluation of the ethical committee with the other part of the procedure. I know it's a bit difficult, but we have to think that while I have already submitted all my material to my national ethical committee for pediatric population, at the same time, the sponsor, which might be me, sometimes it's possible, but also the, let's say, the pharmaceutical company that whose product I want to test, basically has to submit through the CTIS a request to the so-called referring member state. I will have, for instance, in this case, the let's say, pharmaceutical company X that wants to have Italy as a referring member state, even if I have a multinational clinical trial, so also involving Spain and other countries, okay? So basically, the sponsor must submit all the application dossier, which is better described at Article 25, 80, and Annex 1, which has a series of documents, for instance, the protocol, things about the informed consent, or if it is a pediatric population, also the pediatric, the opinion of the pediatric committee of the EMA for a question of patent of its product. And once all these documents are submitted, the reporting member state, so in this case Italy, through the let's say specialized entity, in this case it will be the Ministry of Health, has 10 days to decide on the submission. What does it mean? It means that it does not evaluate all the contents of that have been submitted, but it skims through them and checks two things. First, whether it is a clinical trial that we are talking about, so the clinical trial regulation is applicable, and whether the application is complete according to the Annex 1, which has a complete list of all the documents that must be submitted, included also the insurance or any other legal coverage that is accepted by the reporting member state. So far, so good. Can I go on?
Okay. Yes, Francesca.
Yes, please. Yes.
I would like to do just one question. If there are more clinical centers, not just in Italy, let's say, all the Ministry of Health should do this review? No.
No. Okay. There is just, I will, there is also, thank you for the question, but also I will explain it in another slide, but basically, if we are a consortium, let's put it like this, of investigators, and we are of different member states, we have to decide on one member state, okay, to be the referring one, so that the procedure is unique and it has effect for the decision of this, let's say, reporting member state is valid throughout the EU. It is true that there are some rules that govern maybe unlikely cases in practice, meaning, for instance, I submit my documentation as a sponsor and I ask in the application, in the submission and the application, that the referring member states through XIII is Italy, even though I specify that the clinical trial will also take place in Spain. I think that in this there will be a way to be notified for the member states that are mentioned, and let's say Spain wants say no, this is a clinical trial in which I want to be the leader as a referring member state, so I will basically ask the referring member state to give the in charge to me, but this is a very residual hypothesis, I would say, in practice, because I think that already it's a huge responsibility to receive, to be a referring member state in this case. So I think most likely the state that has been considered referring state in the application will stay the same, but there are rules for which the other member states that might be involved can become the referring member state. But this does not change the fact that once you have a referring member state and its decision is accepted by all the other member states that might be included, because maybe there are different clinical trial sites. So if Italy decides that my clinical trial is not authorized, in the end, this is valid also for the other member states, okay? The same thing goes for the good outcome, meaning that my clinical trial is accepted, okay? One thing that I wanted to mention to you, though, that I know that in this, the title of this presentation was after the transition period, and I sensed that there was a bit of let's say fear or like apprehension, but in reality it's much easier, in the sense that in the transition period sometimes you have to apply old rules with new rules, and it might be quite difficult. Now, after the end of the transition period, it's simpler in a way, just because you can rely only on the clinical trial regulation. Okay, so basically, already knowing the text very well, you have a fair idea of what actually you can expect and you can do. So we've said, let's say that the member state, the referring member state selected through the XIII and the application and submission procedure has accepted its role, that it has considered that our clinical trial falls within the CTR and that the documentation is complete. Of course, if the documentation is not complete, the member state through the XIII requests the sponsor to give the incomplete, the missing files, for instance, or ask for information, okay? But then there is the assessment part. As in the first part of this slide that I was telling you, you have always to think that it's like two train tracks, okay? They are parallel lines that are going towards the direction in this way. So basically, what does the member state do? It carries out two kinds of assessment. The first kind of assessment is to check whether the clinical trials respects the principles that are established in Chapter 5, especially they consider what are the risks that this clinical trial imply, what are the benefits that it could give to patient by trying out a new medicinal product, whether the issues concerning labeling have been respected, and also they will look at the opinion of the pediatric committee, which is let's say, an internal committee to EMA, the European Medicine Agency, which must be consulted before doing this all prior authorization and submitted in order to have like an investigation plan, especially for pediatric patients. So if you already have and also what this how can I say, result of the query to the pediatric committee to EMA is one of the elements that must be submitted through the XIII system at the really when the sponsor submits all of the requested and the mandatory elements. So if the committee has said that the pediatric investigation plan is adequate, then this will give a better chance to the clinical trials to be approved. And then you have a second assessment part, which goes in parallel, basically, to the first assessment part. Sometimes I will say that it's two different, let's say, parts of the ministry, and especially the one specialized, let's say the department specialized in clinical trials, which work at the same time, but by looking at different elements. Because the assessment part 2 is more interdisciplinary, because they check about what issues and safeguards have been addressed for giving an informed consent. Is the document that is prepared to be shared with the subjects clear enough? Then, especially for minors, can a minor understand whether this is a good informed consent? Plus, there is the compliance with the GDPR. Here I want just to draw your attention to the fact that in reality, in the clinical trial regulation, there is no mention of the GDPR, but of the directive that was preceding the GDPR, because the GDPR was approved in 2016, and the clinical trial regulation, it was a bit before, it was approved a bit before of that. And so whenever you read the directive on the protection of personal data, you have to basically make a substitution in your head and think about the GDPR and the corresponding rule. So how long does it take? Basically, summing up all the different intervals of time, it's 45 plus 39 days. Like if there are questions that are being asked to, let's say, to the sponsor, always through the XIII portal, and the specific delays in which the sponsor has to reply. And finally, there is a decision on the clinical trial, which can be authorized but with subject to condition, and finally not authorized. Here I don't want to discuss in detail this, but I wanted just to give you a preview of the data that must be submitted in the clinical dossier. It's very, let's say, precise. It's difficult to put all these rules one after the other, but I'm saying that, as I was saying before, now you don't have any legal uncertainty. It's just the text of the clinical trial regulation, okay? So you don't have to harmonize with the previous, let's say, discipline, which can bring a bit of uncertainty and also interpretative questions. One of the things that I wanted to stress on is that while we are in the assessment phase, okay, so I am the reporting member states, especially if I am evaluating a trial that is supposed to be carried out in a pediatric population, the referring members, the reporting members, they must have people who are expert in dealing with minors, or in any case having a pediatric expertise. Okay, so that already is a safeguard that we've seen. It all reconnects to the first part of Article 3, the general principles, so the protection and the prevailing of the protection of the subject, even if it's a minor, over any other kind of interest. So basically, Nerea asked me before what it was the procedure for basically the hypothesis in which I have more member states, okay, which are participating in the clinical trial. So basically, there is an initial assessment by the reporting member state within 26 days from the date of validation. The validation is when the referring member states checks very quickly whether the clinical trial suggested is within the application of the clinical trials regulation and whether the documentation is complete. The reporting member states prepare a draft assessment concerning part 1. Then there is a coordinated review carried out within 12 days from the end of the initial assessment phase, together with all concerned member states. And the concerned member states shall jointly review the application and share comments. And finally, the reporting member states may request additional information to the sponsor. And then there is the consolidation phase that is conducted by the reporting member states within, sorry, I'm really bad with numbers and I don't see 7 days from the conclusion of the coordinated review phase. So it's a bit complex, but in any case, you can see that for the most important part, the reporting member states, in any case, asks the other concerned member state their opinion, but in the end, it's the one who decides, which decides. So now, I wanted to focus a bit more on the informed consent. So it's one of the most important elements that must be present in the informed consent document that must be present within all the documentation that is submitted through the CTIS to the reporting member state, because otherwise, without it, the clinical trial is not legitimate. Okay. If we want to understand how to get a good informed consent document, we have to refer to Article 29 of the CTR. It creates a framework. So it says to us that it must be in written form, it has to be dated, it has to be signed, in this case, by the legal representative, if we're talking about a minor. If the subject, but maybe who is of more than 18 years old, cannot write, it's also allowed to have other supports that can be used. And what is the content of this informed consent document? So you have to give the essential information about the clinical trial, its objective, how it is carried out, what are the risks for the person who wants to take part in this, and also to give the instruction on how to withdraw from the clinical trial, but it must be clear to the subject that the withdrawal can be done at any moment. And when drafting this document and submitting it to subject in a second phase, must think to write it and explain it in a way that does not presume that we are talking with a person who is expert about these themes. So we don't have to take anything for granted. Now I have a question for you. Do you think the informed consent is the same consent that we talk about when we discuss, for instance, about personal data protection? Or not?
What do you mean, Francesca? If we should consider data protection in the informed consent, or?
Yeah, if you think that there are any difference for the consent that is mentioned here, informed consent in the clinical trial regulation or in the GDPR.
I think so.
No, in the sense
No?
that almost. So basically, it is true that this concept, the informed consent for the clinical trial, to participate in the clinical trial, it overlaps a bit with the consent, which is a legal base through which you can process personal data from the subject. It is true that in a clinical trial, we will always have personal data because we're talking about not only personal data such as name and surname or where this person lives, but also especially data concerning health or genetic data in some other cases. But functionally, the functions are different. The informed consent document serves the purpose of informing the subject that they are about to start a clinical trial with some risks and with some possible benefits, whereas it remains separate. Also from a bureaucratic point of view, you have two different documents from, let's say, the privacy policy, to have it in mind, through which we ask to process the personal data that we might acquire through the course of the clinical trial. And in order to do that legally, most of the time, the reason upon which we do that is the consent of the individual, saying the individual say, okay, you can process my data. So the consent in GDPR, you can process my personal data. The informed consent say, okay, I understand willingly and I want to participate in this clinical trial. Okay. Also,
so it's different.
Yes, it's different.
This is what I said. Yes.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
at some point, yeah, of course, because on the one hand, you only cover, that the legal part of the personal data. The other, they are informing you and you are consenting that this process can have some problems, some secondary effects, etc., that this is not the same that we cover in the other. So I guess.
Okay, perfect.
Yes.
So I understood it.
No.
But in any case,
No.
It's nice to repeat. And
yeah, perfect. Yes. Thank you.
And also, it's important. This is still connected to protection of personal data. That if you want to use the personal data that you retrieve in this clinical trial, okay, for, I don't know, publications, other kind of future research, I don't know, it must be explained a little bit in the let's say privacy policy that you are distributing. Okay, so the person has to know that the personal data that also result from this clinical trial might be used for future publication or for other research, and they have to agree expressly on that. I say this because in Italy we have a very difficult procedure for this. Maybe in Spain, I hope that it's much swifter, but it's something that you have to take into account whenever you start a clinical trial. Okay, so that's it. And now I want to focus, of course, on minors. We have discussed that the informed consent, let's say, main rule is at Article 29, but in reality, to construct how the informed consent should be taken by minors lawfully, you have to combine Article 28, which are general principles concerning the well-being of the person, the fact that they have to understand clearly what the clinical trial entails for them, and the specific article on minors and the informed consent, which is Article 32. So, as a rule, the informed consent, we're talking about minors, must be obtained by the legal representative of the minor, such as the parent or any other legal tutor, for instance, if there are no parents. But yeah, okay, bye. Tell me if I'm running over time, because there is a lot of things to say, and I'm not looking at my watch, Nerea. So,
Okay. We are now 10 to 2. So
10 to 2.
we will be until 2:30. So I think you have at least 10 more minutes, and then we can.
Okay. I will go faster then. So basically, the rule is that in any case, the autonomy of the minor must be looked after and registered. Okay. So it's important that whenever you are asking the informed consent of a minor, a child, there are people who are experts in dealing with them, and you have to take into and capable of assessing their mental maturity. Okay, of course, like if we're dealing with very small children, it will be mainly the legal representative who will have to understand what the clinical trial entail for their child. But for instance, if we have an older child but is very mature for their age, it is important to make them part of this process, and also to respect the explicit wish of a minor who is capable of forming an opinion, and you have to assess it, okay, with also their legal representative. And it's important also for them to understand that they can withdraw. Even here, we have to make a distinction. If we have a very, very small child, the decision of the withdrawal will be done mainly by the legal representative. But whenever we don't have such a small child, and we have a small person that is able to form their own thoughts, then you have to listen to them, and for instance, if you have like an adolescent of 16 years old who says, I don't wish anymore to be in this trial, of course, it's something that you have to take into consideration, even if their legal representative does not agree. Or in any case, you have to make the legal representative understand that perhaps if the minor who is old enough gives some reasons about it, they should be allowed to do that, and so they should second the minor's choice. So yeah, here I don't think I will have to deal with that, but it's important that during the clinical trial there are some vigilance rules. They are done by the sponsor, basically through the EUDRA vigilance database, which will be, I think, connected to the XIII, even though for now it's a separate entity. You have to report adverse events. What are adverse events? Basically, it's events that cause something that is not good for the patient, but that are not connected by a causality link from the, let's say, taking the medicinal and being in the clinical trial. Whereas you have to report the adverse reaction anytime that it happens, and as fast as you could. Any adverse reaction, of course, is anything that worsens the health of the subject until you reach also, in the unfortunate case, death. So yeah, let's go further. During the clinical trial, the principle that must be followed is the compliance with the protocol and the good clinical practices. There are also other obligations such as monitoring, but also the suitability of the people involved. I already told you that the investigator must be a medical doctor. There are some rules concerning the traceability and also perhaps the destruction of medicinal products, and the reporting obligation concerning serious breaches or ones for the safety, and if it's needed to employ urgent safety measure. And in this way, you have to update two documents: the investigator brochure, we have talked about it at the beginning, whenever any relevant safety info becomes available, and the clinical master file, which is shared between the investigator and the sponsor. And even here, it's basically everything that is happening in the life of the clinical trial, and it must be archived for at least 25 years. As far as liability, here it's one of the parts in which the states retain more flexibility, in the sense that the civil and criminal liability of the reporting member states will be used in any case as a framework for judging also if something bad happens, who is the responsible person. And for damage compensation, it's important that since the beginning there are some means to cover risks and injuries, and that's why generally it's like either insurances or warranties, proof of insurances or warranties that are attached to the application, the first initial application of the clinical trial. Sometimes during like the carrying out of the clinical trial, only when things are very serious, a member state can revoke the authorization of a clinical trial. This is, of course, a real worst case scenario, or suspend it, but also it can require the sponsor to modify any aspect of the clinical trial. And if there is a substantial modification, there will be another authorization procedure to undergo. So it's really serious, and the member states can carry out inspection as well as the commission. So here I think I finish. I hope to have stayed within time, and I will share also the slides with Nerea. And here are very interesting and very informative documents that I found. Especially I want you to look at the sponsor handbook. I don't know if you are sponsors or not, but I think this is a valid document, because it explains in detail what you need to do with the program XIII that needs to be used to submit your application and to carry on the communication with the referring member state. Also, there is this very important document concerning how to divide the responsibility concerning processing of personal data. It's basically a joint controllership agreement within the EMA, the Agency for Medicine in Europe, and also the Commission. As far as the XIII and the data that are on it are involved. And finally, there is a brochure for the training and support for the clinical trials information system. So I guess that this is all from my side, and I thank you very much for sorry, here I lost the window. For being here today, and please, I'm available for questions. I hope I can reply, because I told you, to the people who were here before, I'm more trained in the medical device regulation implementation, also for minors, than this, but I will try to give you an informed reply.
Thank you very much, Francesca. Your presentation was very clear, I will say. We are also, thank you, Guillermo, for joining us.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, Guillermo.
And now we have some time for questions. So please feel free to come into the discussion, to open the micro.
I will. I just want to first thank you, Francesca, because I think that this kind of seminars that we have planned along the life of the project are really relevant for us to understand, especially for people that are not so much into these aspects of when you I come from the technological sector, but I work a lot in healthcare for many years. So for me, all these terms and all these regulations and all the way of implementing the trial are well known. So far, even if I don't know all the terms and all the different articles, but there are many, other partners in the project that maybe they are not so much familiarized. So that's why we consider that this is really interesting, for people to familiarize why this process have to happen, and why always we say, when we start a project like this, okay, let's wait for the clinical study to be approved, to pass the ethical committee, to that this is sometimes blocking some of the
Yeah, I know.
we want to develop things from the very beginning, but we know we can't until things like this process are approved. And so I think that these are very it's very important to have these educative talks. And so if I have to say about the project, the current status, because you know that we have 3 pilots that are happening, and we submitted all the documentation, so we are almost there. So all these processes of creating the informed consent, etc., were already done within the project. But I just want to thank you because and also Nerea for organizing, because I think that this is very illuminative. I don't know how to say to know how this works. So thank you so much for your time and for being here today.
Thank you. But I might also have a question for you then, because of course I when I did with this presentation, I was thinking about Italy mostly because it's a system that I know more, and I wanted to ask you in Spain if the ethical committees are national, or that you have to rely on the different communities. Like if you want to, is it possible to have, for instance, a clinical trial approved in Spain, or you have to get the approval of all the relevant ethical committee in which you want to carry out the clinical trial?
No, so far in Spain, if you get the approval in one hospital, then you are approved for the other hospitals,
Okay.
even if they belong to different communities. So I think it's the same. Even if we have, we have a national healthcare system, but then the communities that, the regions that really manage the healthcare. But at this point, they are approved. That's why we sometimes rely on one hospital, to wait for them to have the approval. So it's automatically approving the others.
Okay, so and so especially, I don't know if you are sponsors, who is your sponsor, but I think that especially in the last part of my slides where I left all the resources that I found, they are very lengthy. So they are manuals who are really big, but they explain really in detail how to familiarize with the software, what kind of data are needed, the documents. So basically, I found it very informative, even if I didn't have the time to read like in detail everything about it, but I think it will be a huge help. And of course, we know that institutions are made by people. So, like the rules might also be nice. Okay, then of course, then the practice is always different. But I think that the clinical trials regulation is a real chance to have a much integrated, European research, especially because this would mean, I guess, for you also having more representativeness of the results, if you have more patients and if you can coordinate. So yeah, I think the fact of having a single entry point is okay. There are some cons in the sense that you have to familiarize with something that was not there and might be very new, but on the other hand, it should simplify basically how research is approved and conducted. So, for instance, if you have clinical trials in Spain and in other countries, if you put or whoever is the sponsor in the system, the referring member state Spain, then it will be fine. Like whatever is decided, there will be, they are involved, but as you see, there is one member state that carries on the most of the decisions. So yeah, so and if it's the one of the system in which you lived in, and you have more practice, it's easier, I would say. Hopefully, yeah. Then we don't know, but I try to stay hopeful at least for research purposes.
Fantastic. Thank you so much again.
Okay, thank you all. It was a very interesting also experience for me to a bit step out of my comfort zone and try to see a regulation that I knew. I studied it in university, but that of course a lot of time has changed. Things have changed, and a lot of time has passed, and also for pediatric patients, which is always very interesting to me.
It was great, Francesca. Well, taking advantage of your expertise in medical device regulation, I would like to tell you that in the context of PROTECT-CHILD, we mainly focus on develop an infrastructure to collect the data.
Okay.
And then we are now considering the MDR to apply in our project, because we are more focused in research, not like clinical decisions and these kind of things. But from your perspective, do you when do you see that MDR could apply to this kind of platforms when we do research? Not like decisions, clinical decisions. It could apply at some point or not.
Only if you decide. So the premise. It's a time of huge changes as well as far as medical devices, because as you know, the digital omnibus is going on. A lot of medical devices are incorporating AI, and it's not clear whether the text of the medical device regulation should stay the same or it will be modified at some later point. It should be simplified. There is a proposal for simplification of that. So I will take, to reply to your question, the actual state of things. So the MDR that was approved in 2017. So if you are building an infrastructure, but it does not fall within the definition of medical device, okay, so it must have a medical function, and you have to check with the ones that are listed in Article 2 of this regulation. Then if it doesn't, and you don't, if it doesn't have one of these functions, then I wouldn't say that the MDR applies. But for instance, if I think it's more the competence also of Guillermo, who is not here, but to collect data, I think that now and to create the infrastructure, you have to really focus on the one hand, GDPR, because in any case, I guess that there will be some personal data. You have to look how Spain is going to implement the European health data space, because it will centralize basically also the sharing of data for research, and you might have to contribute to that, because it depends on the set of data that you have. And also, I would say, look at the cybersecurity things. Now there is the Cyber Resilience Act and the Cybersecurity Act that give a, let's say, harmonized framework for non-medical devices, okay? I want to be clear, because for cybersecurity of medical devices, we still don't have a EU regulation or something. Possibly something will come concerning cybersecurity for medical devices if the medical devices regulation is updated. But yeah, like this, I would say, are the two main roads that I would follow. Check whether it falls within the definition of medical device. Maybe I don't think so. So if not, data protection regulation, then European health data space and cybersecurity regulations.
Okay, yeah, because actually to give more correct context, within the PROTECT-CHILD platform, we aim to also collect the data in a federated way. So each center will have its own capsule, and then the interested researchers will be able to do a set of analysis in a federated way.
Okay.
But the results of this analysis, if I understood good so far, will be not related to clinical decisions or these kind of things. Maybe we can find any association, like for example, genetic data, maybe an adverse clinical event, but it will to validate this result, we will need another study. So the result given from the platform not yet will be a clinical result and not used as this.
Okay, so in this case, I still don't think that the MDR applies, but for sure, the results of this research, if they end up, if they are used by the researchers to create a medical device, yes, then the MDR can be used. But I don't think that it will apply to the
our platform.
to the no, because the words say, the MDR applies to devices, and whenever I think we're talking about infrastructure, unfortunately, it's different pieces of legislations that you have to put together. Mainly, I would say the fact that you already decided for a federated way is comforting in the sense that the privacy-wise is the safest way at the moment to also have clear-cut liabilities among the different institutions. Sorry, I'm a lawyer, so I always think that something bad can happen. But when it does, it's useful to have thought about that before. So I think that already I don't see problems, also because you have to have had the data protection impact assessment. You have to have considered risk. So I think it's okay for the moment. And then it's with the product of I think the MDR, if it is applicable, it's for the product of the research. For instance, they decide the researchers decide based on their researches to create a new medical device or a new in vitro device, or maybe they want to create a clinical study because they say this does not convince me a lot, so maybe we have to try this new way. And in this way, then I would see the MDR, the IVDR, the in vitro devices regulation, that is the twin of MDR, and the clinical trials regulation apply fully, to the second part, but the research will be outside of and how you retrieve data will be outside the scope of these three regulations on trials, medical devices, and in vitro medical devices.
Okay, thank you, Francesca. Anyone would like to ask question or to comment something regarding the seminar? Otherwise, I think we can close the discussion. So thank you very much, Francesca.
Thank you, Francesca. Thank you so much.